Perfect. Okay. How are you finding the whole social distancing thing with the work that you're doing? Do you find that it's had a huge effect on it? Like I mean, it must. You can't connect with people the way that you were.
It's difficult, right? Because we don't have a choice of what we get to go to. Once you're told to go to a call, you have to go. Um, it's affected us because several people in our unit have tested positive. So I just had my test done last Saturday and just got my results back yesterday that they were negative. But going out in the community, it is a huge barrier, especially in dealing with adolescents, because I'm showing up with a mask on, gloves on, and it's scaring kids. And, so I have to step back, take my mask off, as long as the parent's okay with that at a distance, and try to calm this child down. Or even if it's a person in crisis, the mask is scary. It's just,
Yeah.
people don't wear a mask unless you're going to rob a bank or something. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's just, you just don't see it. I need like an emoji happy face mask or something.
Yeah.
I think would probably lighten the mood or something. But yeah, it's a barrier. It's a barrier to communication.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm a body language trainer, so I've done a lot of studying on body language and facial expressions, and that would certainly inhibit communication because you're only seeing like this much of people, and there's so much that you can't see. But I guess it causes you to rely on your other skills that much more to be able to connect with people.
Yeah.
Really, I think what it comes down to is, and I don't know if this was you or Joe that said this, but it's about you guys showing up, and what we all need to do is show up and just give a shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And, I tell the cadets that on day one, look, you're going to learn how to shoot your gun. You're going to learn how to drive fast. That's fine. But really in this job, somebody's called because their inability to cope with whatever the situation is has been exceeded. They need you to show up and give a shit.
Yeah.
Listen, try to connect with them, and then be equitable in whatever the outcome is going to be, and make them feel validated.
Yeah.
A simple way to do that for me is just to tell somebody, look, if this would have happened to me, this same situation, I probably would have called the police too and expected them to show up and help me kind of resolve this. That's an easy way to validate somebody to where they don't feel like, I didn't know what else to do, so I called the police, right? It's okay. You're not bothering me.
Yeah.
I was meant to meet you today, so it's good to meet you, and how can I serve you? It's not a hard thing to do, and it's really not.
That's just it, right? It's not that hard to do, but yet it seems so hard. It's like,
police training is antiquated.
Yeah, like you were saying.
It's antiquated because it is based on fear, and that's just it's not realistic. When I go to a restaurant, I'm not the guy that's going to sit with my back to the wall to where I have to see the front door. I'm not going to live my life in fear. If somebody's going to come in and start shooting, I'm going to probably hear it and then take action if I have to, but I'm not going to live my life in fear. And it's so difficult to teach a new trainee, a cadet, when you're showing them all these defensive tactics, which are important, but you're setting them up for a very high stressed, burnout, fatigued type situation in their career. And we're seeing it take its toll. Number one, in the suicide rate of officers, but number two, they're leaving the profession a lot earlier than they used to. People are not, when you joined the police department, you were there for 30 years. Mm-hmm. That was it.
Yeah.
And now they're getting out before 20.
Yeah. It's heart-wrenching. Like the rates of suicide, I know in the fire service and paramedics and police. And I think you talked about a colleague. Was it you or Joe that talked about a colleague that had taken their own life?
Yeah, Joe and I I've handled 6 officer suicides. He was with me on 3 of them. And can these things be avoided? Hell yes. What drives me nuts is where, I hear an officer get arrested. Hey, this officer got arrested for DWI. And then 4 or 5 other officers tell me, oh yeah, it was a matter of time. And I'm like, well, if you knew something, why didn't you do something? Like, why didn't you help this person?
Yeah.
and it's just, you have to change this culture. And what I'm worried about with the protesting is this could go one of two ways, right? I mean, when 9/11 happened, you had people that got very patriotic and joined the military to go fight, right? When you're seeing communities getting burned down, you may get that same response. You may get a lot of people that say, not my neighborhood. I'm going to join the police department and not put up with this. Or you're going to get people that say, there is no way I'm going into this profession. Like, it's too early to tell what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But if you do get those type of people, not my community, this is not going to happen. What message is that sending, right? It's already us against them mentality. And I tell the cadets, look, it's not like it's a bridge where we have this chasm between us, and it's the police over here and the community over here. Picture yourself on a Carnival cruise line in the middle of the ocean. We're all on this boat together, so we have to make this work. And how do we do that? By informing the public, by educating the public, and most importantly, by listening to the public of what their concerns are. That's huge, and it needs to be done.
It's almost overwhelming to think about what police officers are up against right now. And even it's spilling over into other first responders, and firefighters are needing to wear vests as well when they go to calls, and paramedics. And it's just mind-boggling, but especially for the police. And it's so polarizing, like you said, right now. People are either like supporting the police or they're against. And my father was a cop 25 years ago before he passed away. And it was so different. I think they're just so different from what it is now. I can't even imagine, but I do remember him. I remember meeting people years after he passed away and said, oh, I remember your dad. He was one of the good ones. He'd drive me home if I was drunk, and never would throw me in jail or whatever. And the policing profession definitely has changed very much over the years, as has firefighting. But dealing with mental health issues, especially coming out of COVID and with everything else that's going on in the world, it's going forward. It's what everybody's going to be dealing with more and more. It probably more than some other stuff.
And we're seeing a spike with COVID again. I mean, here it goes again, right? It's Groundhog Day all over again. Here in Bexar County, the triple digits now. It is getting, we don't have a break. Like Nick told me yesterday on his podcast, I want a refund for 2020. Like, I'm getting bricked off this year. It's been horrible. So where do we go from here? I don't know, but I know this, we have to go it together.
Yeah.
We have to go it together. And it starts with us.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about us as law enforcement. It has to start with us. We have to up our game, be a lot more professional than we've been. The crap I'm seeing on TV is disgusting in every fashion. And we've got to do better. We can do better. And you have my word, I will do better.
I don't doubt that at all. And with what you just mentioned, what we've seen on TV, I know how that is for people who aren't in policing to watch it. I can't even imagine how that is for those of you that are in the policing profession to watch something like that.
Well, I can tell you. So my job when the protest started here was I worked in an undercover capacity as a protester. So I was in the crowd. When 6,000 people were marching here last week, I was one of the ones marching. And let me tell you what it did for me. It was a 2-hour march. And during that time, I heard I heard the chants, I heard F the police, I heard it all. But when we finally stopped and people had an opportunity to talk, I could feel the pain. I saw the pain. I watched the tears roll down people's faces. They have an absolute legitimate concern with the way police departments are being run in this country. They have an absolute concern. And to be honest with you, Jen, I forgot for a moment I was a police officer. I got caught up in this emotion. And I was like, yeah, man, like, why aren't we being better? Why isn't change taking place? And I want to be a part of this solution. The problem is, as a police officer at a patrolman level, you're only allowed to be as smart as your rank. So my voice doesn't go very high. Luckily with the documentary, it's given me a little bit of a platform. And I do have the ear of some of our legislatures here, and we're talking about reform and what that's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. It's just mind-blowing to think about where things are going, where they're at and where they're going. And um, going back to the documentary for a sec, one thing that really struck me as well as super powerful was where it might have been in your cadet training or your recruit training, where they brought in people who have experienced mental health issues and allowed them to share their story and allow officers and cadets to ask them questions about it, which I turned to my husband and I said, that is powerful. That is what we need more of. Because when I taught one of my mental health courses to a group of fire officers, there's an exercise we're supposed to do at the end with some role playing. And I said, let's turn this and do this differently. Because I was off my department for anxiety at that point. I'd taken a step back because I was having some struggles. And I turned it into a dialogue where I opened it up to the officers. And I said, if you have any questions about what it's like to have a mental health issue, to struggle with depression or anxiety or PTSD, open floor, be kind and respectful, but ask me anything. And we just had an honest conversation. And I think that is when I said earlier about how we need to go deeper. It's having those kinds of conversations so that people have a better understanding of something that if they've not experienced it, they can't understand it. And I just thought that was so helpful for your department, your new people coming in, to have that perspective, like firsthand perspective, in addition to the training that you're all provide.
Yeah, so what that does is that creates a partnership between the community and the police department. And we're trying to normalize this for officers, saying, look, yes, this is the community, but could also be the person you're sitting next to right now. And, you know, when you watch that cadet ask a question, he said, look, I don't want to use the wrong term, but when you're in an episode, and I love that, because that just shows the rawness of a cadet that has very little life experience and has zero knowledge on mental health and what it looks like, because it can look different in everybody. And for them to finally get a face-to-face with members of the community that have struggled with mental health and are in recovery, this is so powerful. And I just hope that they hang on to that, because, you know, when you're in an 8-month academy, the 1 week for mental health, it's not real sexy. Let's be honest. Like, we're going to learn what for a week? Good night. You know, and heads are starting to go down. And I'm like, this 1 week might just change your life, and it might just save your life. You know, it's that important. But, you know, again, the topic needs to be reinforced.
Up here in Ontario, or at least in Canada, I think it's 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health issue. And I'm sure it's similar down in the States. And that's what I always tell people. If it's not you, if you've not had firsthand experience with it, it's somebody you know, a loved one, a family member, daughter, son, spouse. Like it's going to touch your life sooner or later. And on that note, I almost wonder if there's a way at some point to have conversations like that with the Black community, for police officers that don't, like, where there's such a disconnect, to hear those stories firsthand, to have that better understanding.
Oh, I tell you what, if you've not seen Emmanuel Acho do his YouTube video on uncomfortable conversations with a Black man, I highly recommend it. I highly recommend it. Because I can tell you this, as a white man in America, when I think of all the struggles that I've had of any situation in my life, not one of them has revolved around myself being white. Now I had to take a step back and sit down when I thought about that after I heard him talk. And so when we're talking about connecting with the Black community, a couple of things, right? Is number one, you have to be compassionate and you have to show empathy. You really do. And when I hear the term, well, you know, we need to invite our Black community to the table. Well, that tells me who's in control of the table then, right? And that's, we're missing the mark here. So right now, what we're seeing in this country is a perfect opportunity for change. Right now, we're very hyped up on emotion right now, and we need it to level off a little bit to where now the conversation takes place, the learning process takes place, and then we can have that connection, that empathy, and then that growth. Because I believe in every crisis, there's going to be good on the end of that. I'm very
Yeah.
optimistic about that. I'm very optimistic about hope in this country. We just have to get there, and we have to do it together.
I absolutely agree. It's making me, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, I wonder what it's like to be, and forgive me if this isn't the right terminology, but a Black police officer, because you've got both sides of it. You're not only a police officer watching this all unfold, you're a Black police officer. And I don't know if there's actually an answer to that, but it just makes me, there's an added element of how do you navigate that situation? How do you find your bearings in that? I don't know if you have a lot of Black police officers on your department. I'm assuming you have both, many nationalities on your department, but it must be an added struggle. And have you had conversations with them about?
Yeah, we have. In fact, one of the officers, African-American officer that's in our PIO, our public information office, he went out and marched in uniform. We had no officers, not one officer show up in uniform in March. And he called me, he said, Ernie, I'm going to do it. I said, okay, Doug, like, hey, man, I'm with you. I was told, no, you work an undercover assignment and you can't expose your identity right now. Okay. So he went and marched, and then he came back to me and he said, let me tell you, that was the most emotional experience of my life. And what I understand about myself is, man, I've been hurting for years. Like and he would say it. I mean, if I saw, a white family walking down the street, I moved to the side a little bit because I didn't want to be perceived as a threat. In his mind, that's what he has to deal with. So he said, when I see a Black person getting hurt, I hurt as a Black man. When I see a police officer get hurt, I hurt as a police officer. I hurt for humanity, and we've got to be better, right? So, and I heard this point today. It said, do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference? And I think that just sums this whole situation up, right?
Yeah.
We can point fingers all day and say, hey, you're wrong. You need to take responsibility. Okay, I'll do that. You've made your point. Now let's make a difference, and move forward.
Mm-hmm. And thank you for that perspective that you just shared, because in telling the story of your, the African-American that marched in uniform and how he feels for everybody else and everything that's going on, I can relate to that in respect of, I feel for the people that you're dealing with and that are covered in that documentary and way beyond that, because it's a struggle I know. So that story that you just shared really put it into perspective for me too, and the unique situation that you all find yourself in right now, which is just hard to wrap your head around even. But did you want, I'm just checking the time here, so it's almost 8 o'clock, and I know we had a little bit of a blip there, but if anybody has any questions, raise your hand or unmic yourself or whatever, or pop them in the chat. There's one.
Hey, Jim, why don't you start us off?
All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. I got you, man.
Okay. I first met Ernie. It was after my buddy Craig was killed by a police officer. And at that time, I was really hating all cops. And Ernie changed my whole perspective on everything. And I owe him a lot. So thank you, Ernie. You mean a lot to me. Some of the questions I have are about training, and I see that we spend money on things more like a military training. Here in Spokane, we had some officers that went to training where they learned how to ride in the back of a vehicle with the doors off, bent over with their rifles, shooting at targets as they're speeding by, as they're escaping a terrorist or something like that. And I look at that training and I think, they say they don't have money for the mental health training, but they have training for that. And right now they're bringing somebody to Spokane County, Dave Grossman, who wrote Killology. I've taken his sheepdog seminar, his 2-day seminar, to see what he was about. And I was just kind of curious, what is your view on Dave Grossman and his type of training, and whether or not departments should embrace it?
Yeah. So I listened to a podcast he was on. I've not read his book, so I don't know if I really have a comment that would substantiate anything that he talks about. But I will tell you this, when you talk about this militarized type training, look at how officers are dressing now. They have that outer carry vest on, with 2 or 3 magazines, a smoke grenade, whatever they carry, right? And they're showing up saying, here, I'm here to help you. Okay, how is the brain supposed to process that when you're in a crisis and you're being approached with somebody that's decked out in just an abundance of gear? I think it sends a wrong message, because remember, in your force continuum, your very first continuum of force is your mere presence. So what does your mere presence say to somebody that's in a crisis? So if you're teaching how to drive around with the doors open and your rifle out, I mean, the last situation I've known was the bank robbery in California, which was how many years ago? Now that I can see. They had to commandeer an armored truck to get those officers out and get civilians out. But that's one time I can think of where I can tell you 25 times last week that I spoke to people in a mental health crisis. And so when we talk defunding the police department, words matter, right? Words matter. So people hear defund and they get scared. Can we reallocate funds? Absolutely we can. We definitely can. Like you said, if they've got money to spend on this type of training, why are we not getting more hours in de-escalation training rather than an increase in the force continuum type training? So can it be done? I'm not scared of the term defund the police. I think it sends a scary message if people don't know what that means, but I think it needs to be defined. Like when we say defund, where are you going to take the money from and how will that affect the community? And then let's have that conversation.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Holden?
Hi.
Hey, buddy.
I've been talking with Ernie for a little bit on Twitter. It's been great to get to know you. This isn't so much a question as it's kind of a comment. I've wanted to be a police officer since I was 6 years old. And I grew up in a city called Billings, Montana, where my first encounter that I remember with a police officer was my best friend's dad was suicidal, locked himself in the house with a gun, and 2 police officers showed up and went in and talked him out. And since that day, I had wanted to become a police officer because just caring about someone else's life with what to me seemed like total disregard for your own was something that appealed to me. And as you grew older, I started to have mental health problems with myself. I've dealt with depression, suicidal thoughts, suicidal actions, and I'm still just a teenager, but getting to know some of the officers here in my local police department in the city of Coralville, I did a Citizens Police Academy with them, and they actually, I don't know, Ernie, did you actually go places to teach police departments about crisis intervention?
Dude, yeah.
Because they recall you coming over to teach them about crisis intervention training, and they praised quite a bit of it, and they talked about how it's actually saved lives here, how because here in Coralville and Iowa City, because it's kind of a metropolitan area, we have a very large mental health issue population as it's a university town, and because of that, there's a lot of drug usage. And they talked about how they were able to, instead of possibly ended up shooting and killing a guy, instead of doing that, if he had pulled a knife like they thought he would, they would have just shut the door. And just talking about that really made everyone think about how much we are teaching our officers about how to use your own gun when you don't know how to use your mouth. You don't know how to talk people out.
Right. So you say I'm just a teenager, but Holden, you're the future, right? You're our future. So I invest into you right now when I say this, that you're right. When we teach a lot of fine motor skills on how to draw a weapon, how to apply a tourniquet, that's very important, right? I don't discard any of that. But here's my thought of what we should be teaching in academies, where I think we're doing a disservice. Is number one, we should be teaching a basic cognition neuroscience class that deals with bio behaviors, right? So what I mean by that is if you know how the brain works, if you know how memories are formed, if you know why you react a certain way to certain situations, then you're better prepared to deal with a stressful event. Okay. Also, I think learning like what you just described yourself, if we teach the officers adverse childhood experience classes about what type of trauma did you experience as a child? Was it like you described, feeling depressed, your parents getting divorced? Were you a victim of childhood sexual abuse or physical abuse? As you learn about yourself and what you've been affected by through trauma, and then you learn about the brain and why it reacts the way it does, you are going to be so much better prepared to deal with interacting with the community. But yet we spend all this time on defensive tactics and shooting and chasing. And it seems like academies are very long, at like an 8-month academy, like what we have. But to be honest with you, that's very, very condensed. You look at how they do it in other places, in Germany, Finland, you go to school for years to become a police officer, for years. And throughout that time, you're doing 40 weeks of ride-alongs, you know, in 2 to 3 years of school. So you're absolutely right when we talk about how to use our words versus using our weapon. And a lot of that comes down to these role-based scenario trainings. And one of the ones I'm really looking forward to is training the officers to better police each other, like what we saw in Minneapolis, to reach over and pull somebody off and say, stop, I got this. I got it from here. So we need to do a lot better when it comes to training. And I'm going to work on that. My goal is to change the culture and the way policing is taught before I'm done.
Yeah. My main thing is just you're doing a lot of good work over there in San Antonio, and it's definitely rubbing off in a good way in other parts of the country. So I just wanted to point out the fact that you have definitely saved lives.
Thank you, man. I hope you enjoyed your poster.
Yeah, I did.
All right.
Did Ernie send you a poster?
What?
And a patch.
Do you what? Holden.
I have it right here.
Nice. That's awesome. Do I get one, Ernie?
I get you one.
Thanks for your question, Holden. And I really hope that you do pursue the policing avenue, because I can tell you're somebody that the policing profession needs, and you do very well. You'd be Ernie. You would be, because you can tell, and Ernie, you touched on this, understanding just childhood trauma and life experience. And you know, when you recognize, at least this is what I've come to learn, you see it in other people. If you've lived it, it's not going to be the same experience, but I mean, I've been in that black place, and I know what depression looks like, and I know what anxiety looks like. And I know people can try and cover it up, but you sense it, you feel it, you recognize it, right? And that's why, the shit we've all been through, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm going to get choked up. It's what allows us to do good in this world and to reach out to other people that are suffering, like you are, and like Joe is, and the other people that are on your team. Even without saying anything, you can just tell when somebody's got that experience, right? Holden, I can see you nodding, and Jim was nodding. And it's, you know what? You can help other people with it. And trust me, and I know Ernie agrees, you should follow that path if that's what's calling you.
So with Holden, real recognizes real. And I had to check him the other day on one of his tweets. Somebody asked, "Hey, what's your superpower?" And what was your answer, man?
My answer was depression.
His answer, so that's not his superpower. Is his authenticity, to be vulnerable and to be seen. And not everybody possesses that power. Embrace that, man. I'm proud of you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah. Depression is, it's something that actually has given you a gift. And anybody that's listening and the stuff that you've all experienced, it felt like a nightmare, but when you can turn it into a gift and reach out to other people, like we see in the documentary and you see day in and day out, that's humanity. That's what's going to change the world. And I just have so much respect for you, Ernie, and for everybody on the call. And again, I apologize for that chaos that happened in the middle of it, because clearly I learned a valuable lesson in that. But this is a conversation I was excited to have with Ernie and with everyone. If there's any more questions, go ahead and ask or put your hand up or whatever. Jim, go ahead.
I was just going to see, I had one quick question. Ernie, how do you feel about having 2 officers per car opposed to 1 officer? I was watching a video earlier of a officer. She was being chased around her patrol car and she kind of lost control of the situation. It escalated where it ended up being an officer involved shooting. And I was wondering, with budgets the way they are, would it be better to try to pair officers up with a partner in a car? Would that help?
Yeah, so that's a good argument that we've had here for years, because here we only ride 1 to a vehicle. Yet they send a second officer to cover you to every single call. So what is the weigh out the cost of what's another vehicle cost? What's the maintenance cost? The gas, the engine? I mean, they're going to send a second officer anyway. Now, what that does to you personally and your psyche, being with somebody every single day over and over and over, I don't know. When I had an officer come down from LAPD and ride with me, he's like, "Y'all are by yourselves?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Man, that's dangerous. Like, we would never do that." For mental health purposes, we have to have 2. Because when we interact, if I'm the primary officer and I'm trying to build a rapport with you, it's very important that I'm locked into everything you're saying. And the cover officer is going to be the one that's writing down all the names of the medications, doctors, family members' names, whatever you're saying. He's my scribe or she's my scribe, writing everything down, because there's a good chance I'm not going to remember a whole lot of that. So for us, it's a must. We have to. If not, we're setting ourselves for failure, because the minute I have to re-ask a question, I may get a response of, "You're just like everybody else. You don't care. You're not listening to what I'm saying. I've already told you that before." And that's a dangerous, road to go down. So I actually agree with 2 personnel riding in a vehicle, because we're responding that way anyway. Now, when you have 2 vehicles out compared to 1, it just seems like there's more officers in the area. There's more of a presence. So it's kind of counterintuitive if you do it one way without doing it the other. It's department specific, I think.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Matt,
Jim.
what do you got? You look like Matt wants to say something.
No, thank you. So this link was forwarded to me through a fire department peer support member contact. So I unfortunately was the only one from our district team that was able to make it here tonight, but really appreciate all of it so far. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Are you in Ontario, Matt?
Yeah, Muskoka actually, so not too far from.
So you got it from Paul?
Yeah, he sent it to me on his drive north. So
yeah. Well, don't tell him about that little thing that happened in the middle with all the.
I text him already. Sorry, it's really funny for me.
Thanks for tuning in, Matt.
How about Susan?
Thanks.
Susan, my friend, what do you got?
Nothing, just observing.
Just observing. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for observing.
How about Earl Greg down at the bottom there? Does he have any questions? No, he don't. He's the strong silent type. I had shared with Ernie just before we got on the call about how my husband is a fire chief and he had to go to a call this morning that was dealing with a mental health issue, possibly a hoarding thing. Won't go into details, but what he did when he came home and talked to me about it after work, what he shared with me was that just the conversation he was able to have with the gentleman. And I said, do you think it would have been different had we not watched the documentary again last night? We'd seen it before, but we watched it again. And he said, you know what? My conversation was different. I had a different, I would have done okay, but I was able to approach it differently. And I had more to kind of offer in a different aspect to take. So it's even just a little bit can make such a big difference, right? Like it gave him a few extra tools in his back pocket. It gave him a little bit of a different perspective because we talked about it beforehand. And I said, just treat him like he's a human being, just like we saw in the documentary, right? Just treat them like they're human beings. They just want to be seen. Everybody just wants to be seen for who they are. And if you can find a way to do that, then you're well ahead of a lot of other people, right? Because everybody's just rushing and doing their thing, and the amygdala's firing and people are under stress and they're just doing things without thinking about it. So again, like as crazy as this conversation even got, there's so many good takeaways in it, and every little bit helps.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say to everybody here before we close and wrap is don't give up on law enforcement. I know things look bad right now. There's some good officers out there that they're trying their best. They're trying to connect. They really want to serve. They got families at home too, and they would honestly, and I'm one of them, would lay down their life for a total stranger and not make it home to my family. And that is what I pledged when I said I was going to do this. So I want everybody to remain optimistic. I believe in humanity. I believe in human connection, and I believe we will get through this, and it will get better. It's going to take all of us to do our part. I know, Jim, with you, I think I'm going to be coming up there and doing some training up there. I love it. If it helps get the message out, I'll do my part. I'll do my part and then some. And that's what I have for you, Jennifer. I appreciate you putting this together tonight. I know this is something you've wanted to do for a while, and I think you hit a home run. I think you hit a home run tonight.
I've hit something right in the middle there of this, but I know I have a lot of people on the fireside that couldn't make it tonight, but they're looking forward to the video. I might send them the second half after the weird stuff, but shit, I lost my train of thought again. Anyway, I just want to thank you again for everything and taking the time to have this conversation, and everybody that showed up on the call and showed back up after the hiccup there in the middle. I appreciate you all for being here and just asking the questions and listening to the conversation and just wanting to, do things differently or understand more or whatever it is for you. I'm glad you're all here, and I'm just very thankful. Thankful for you, Ernie, and for taking the time to have this chat.
I know. No, I enjoyed it. I've been wanting to put some faces to names for a while, so this is the way we were able to do it tonight. So even Susan, who stayed very quiet tonight, thank you for joining everybody, and maybe we can do this again soon.
Thank you.
I'll know better next time what not to do with posting the link on Twitter.
Thank you for putting it together and allowing us to be a part of this. And thank you, Ernie.
Yeah. No, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks, Jim.
All right. Y'all have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.